we do when our leadership fails? Hi, this is Barry Phillips with 10-Minute Torah, Day 2 of the double Torah portion, Chukat and Balak. In chapter number 20 of the Midbar and Numbers, we read that it was the time of the first month of the year, the first new moon, Aviv. So we're 2 weeks away then from celebrating Pesach one last time in the wilderness. In fact, we're beginning the final cycle of the HaMoedim, the feast days in the wilderness before we go into the land. Miriam dies. Now, Miriam has always been with Moshe. She's the elder sister. She's the one who has stayed in touch with him. She's the one who's protected him as an infant. Her name is a compound name, Mar, which means rebellion or bitterness, and Yam, which means either sea or peoples, can be both. So she represents bitter or rebellious people or bitter waters. Not a very nice name, it would seem. However, it was her application of life that enabled her to overcome and to enable other people who were in light circumstance to overcome. She was a prophetess. She worshiped. She celebrated. She was the one, after the horse and rider of Pharaoh's thrown into the sea, that she led a procession of dance and celebration and proclaiming the power and the victory of the Most High. And now she's gone. We're not told that the people spent any particular period of time mourning her death, and maybe that angered Moshe. But we do find out that the very next circumstance is the water dries up. Now, what the rabbinical mind suggests, and I happen to take a lot of appreciation of this here, is that she was prophesying about the reality of the rock. We know that that rock was and is Messiah. And so as she proclaimed the prophetic word pertaining to the rock, the water continually flowed from it. Now, this was not a single stone that Aaron may have carried around in his pocket, but other investigative study shows that Moshe and the elders and Aaron were led to Mount Hor, or to Mount Sinai. Ahead of the rest of the congregation, they struck the rock there, that mountain, and from that mountain of his presence, water flowed and gave cool drink to the cattle, the herds, and to the people. Now, the water dries up. No one's decreeing who this water is and what this water's source is. And no one steps in. Evidently, Miriam has failed to raise up a successor, to be a mentor, to raise up someone who will operate in the gifts of her house. The issues are not complete here. There's more going on. The people complain, you've not given us grain or vines or pomegranates. You've not given us olives. You've not given us figs. And there's no water to drink. Well, it's the most obvious thing here is that there's no water, but they're beginning to reveal that there's some underlying issues. We've been walking in circles around this mountain for decades now, and we're overly anxious to get into the land. It's time to go in. They're frustrated. They're limited. They're strained. They're angry. Moshe and Aaron's response is to fall on their face and do as they have done in the past, and that is to one more time intercede for these people and see if there is not a way that Yah will spare their lives. It would be horrific for the first generation to be all but buried in the sand and completion, and now the second generation rise up in their parents' footsteps and continue this legacy of mumbling, grumbling, and complaining to the place that Yah says, enough of them, I'm done, I'll raise up the third generation. So as Moshe and Aaron are interceding and crying out, Yah gives instructions: go to the rock, take the rod of authority, and speak to the rock. Well, I don't know if it was the fact that maybe he was mad that no one had mourned his sister's death. I don't know that he had, in his older days, gotten frustrated to a place of no return. Were we seeing the reality of his sentiment toward these people all along? But he cries out to them and says, enough of you, you rebels, and struck the rock twice so that water came out. His disobedience, instead of speaking to the rock, he strikes the rock, is enough that Yah says, you're not going into the land. This is devastating. This is completely devastating to Moshe. I understand his frustration. People will indeed wear you out. But the reality is, Yah was trying to establish a spiritual principle here of speaking the word and declaring who the rock is, and Moshe acted in the physical realm. Yah is calling his people, Israel, to come to a place of operating primarily in the Spirit. You and I cannot afford to retreat and relegate our steps in our lives now to a place where we walk after the flesh instead. These are dire days of circumstance. These are days in which you and I are going to be hard pressed. And if Moshe can get out of step and out of sync and not walk in obedience, then we must realize and understand so much more can we. We cannot risk it. Now, there's a couple of the things that take place in this chapter that are very significant. One is Moshe tries his best to negotiate passage through Esau's territory of Edom for Israel to get through in a short order of time. It's not going to happen. Under threat, under threats of violence, under a display of military might, there's nothing else to do. They won't sell, they won't relent, they won't grant. They're going to be obstinate. In the last days, there are going to be some people that you are going to vehemently disagree with. And they're not going to back up. They're not going to listen to your arguments. They're not going to listen to you saying things nicely. You will not be able to pay passage through their lives and endure a relationship with them. Yah is going to separate wheat from tares, sheep from goats. Yah knows those that are his, and those who are not eventually very well may become obstinate and rejecting of us. You need to be prepared for that. And finally, we see the transfer of anointing for the high priesthood from Aaron to his son Eleazar. It's interesting that Mount Hor is what we read. So the Hebrew here is Har Hor, or mountain. Now there is an understanding that Hor can reference parents. But basically what we see then is that Aaron is taken up onto the mountain and he is taken back to the rock from which he has been hewn. He's going back to his source. And there's this transferring of garments. Moshe has to watch as Aaron takes off these glorious robes and garments and places them upon his son Eleazar. El, or Elohim, sustains. What an emotional scene. As Aaron receives a kiss from his own lips, and his soul leaps into the presence of the Most High. Eleazar went up a servant to his father and came down dressed like a king. That's our heart. If we want to enter into the kingdom, take on a servant's heart. When leadership fails, we keep on going. More tomorrow. Till then, shalom.